The alien princess was lost in battle. Until a human returned with her, the war had been long and brutal, stretching across the vast reaches of space. For centuries, the galaxy had been a battleground for countless factions, each vying for power, resources, and control over the stars. Among these factions was the alien race known as the Zura, a proud and fierce species who had long ruled over their own corner of the galaxy. Their princess, Alara, was their greatest warrior, a symbol of strength and unity for her people. Alara was more than just a princess, she was a legend. Her reputation stretched far beyond her homeworld of Zurin, carried across the stars by whispers of her victories on the battlefield. She had led her people through many wars, each one harder than the last, but her strength never wavered. Her people saw her as a goddess in human form, strong, fearless, and unyielding in the face of adversity. But even legends have their limits. The war against the human forces had begun many years ago, sparked by a misunderstanding that quickly escalated into a full-scale conflict. The humans were a new and unpredictable force on the galactic stage. Their technology was not as advanced as that of the Zura, but their ingenuity, resourcefulness, and sheer determination made them formidable foes. They had come to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as settlers, seeking new lands and opportunities in the stars. But as they encountered the Zura and other alien races, their presence was seen as a threat, and the war began. Alara's leadership had been the key to the Zura's success in the early years of the war. Under her command, the Zura forces had pushed the humans back time and again, winning battle after battle. But as the war dragged on, the Zura began to feel the strain. The human forces, though smaller and less technologically advanced, were relentless. They adapted quickly, learning from each encounter and finding ways to counter the Zura's superior firepower. And as the war stretched on, the human forces grew bolder, striking at the heart of the Zura Empire. The battle on the world of Zerax had been the turning point. Zerax was a barren planet, its surface scarred by years of conflict. It had been a key stronghold for the Zura, a place of strategic importance where their forces had long held control. But on that day, everything changed. The humans launched a surprise attack, catching the Zura forces off guard. The battle was fierce, with explosions shaking the very ground beneath their feet, but it wasn't the weapons that ultimately decided the outcome. It was the humans' tactics. Alara was at the forefront, as always, leading her troops with unwavering courage. She fought with all her might, her energy unmatched as she cleaved through the enemy ranks. But despite her strength, the tide of the battle was turning against her. The humans had managed to infiltrate the Zura defenses, bypassing their shields and striking at the heart of their forces. It wasn't long before Alara found herself face-to-face with Captain Derek Riker, the leader of the human unit that had launched the assault. Riker was unlike any human Alara had ever faced before. He was tall and strong, his eyes sharp and calculating, his movements precise and deliberate. He was a master tactician, and in the heat of battle, his every decision seemed to bring the humans closer to victory. As Alara and Riker clashed on the battlefield, it was clear that they were both warriors of equal skill, each unwilling to back down. The ground around them seemed to explode in a blur of fire and debris as they fought with everything they had. But as the battle raged on, something unexpected happened. In the chaos, Alara was separated from her forces, cut off by a blast that sent her crashing to the ground. Her body was bruised and battered, her armor cracked and scorched from the blast. She struggled to rise, but the world around her seemed to spin as the pain coursed through her body. The last thing she saw before darkness overtook her was Riker, standing over her, his face unreadable. When Alara awoke, she was no longer on the battlefield. The familiar sounds of war had been replaced by the hum of machinery and the echo of distant voices. Her limbs were heavy, her body bound by cold chains, and her once pristine armor was now stripped away, leaving her vulnerable. She was in a holding cell, somewhere deep within a human facility. At first, she thought it was some cruel trick, an illusion brought on by the pain and exhaustion. But as the hours passed, reality set in. She was alive, but she was also a prisoner. The mighty princess, the greatest warrior of her people, was now in the hands of her enemies. It was a humiliating thought, but there was something deeper inside her that refused to break. She had been captured before, but never like this. Never after such a devastating defeat. The humans did not kill her as she had expected. Instead, they kept her alive, though she was never told why. They kept her locked away in a cold, sterile cell, far from the battlefields and the people she had once fought for. She could feel the eyes of the humans upon her, studying her, observing her every move. It was clear that they saw her not as a warrior, but as something else, an object of curiosity, a trophy to be displayed. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no word from her captors. She was fed, but little else was provided. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, but the facility was heavily guarded, and every time she tried to test the limits of her confinement, she was met with swift punishment. It was as though they were trying to break her spirit to make her surrender, but Alara's pride was too strong for that. She had been through much worse before, and she would survive this as well. But even in the depths of her captivity, Alara never stopped thinking of her people. She could not abandon them, not when they were still out there, fighting to survive. The Zura were a proud race, but they were not invincible. Without her leadership, they would surely fall to the humans and their allies. She had to escape. She had to return to her people. And yet there was something else gnawing at her, a feeling that she could not shake. She had seen Riker's face before the darkness took her. There had been no malice in his eyes, no sense of victory or triumph. Instead, there had been a flicker of something else. Guilt, perhaps, regret. The thought troubled her more than she cared to admit. What was it about this human captain that made her question everything she had believed in? Why did his face haunt her even in the darkest corners of her prison? As the days went by, Alara's thoughts became increasingly focused on the man who had captured her. She knew that if she ever had a chance to escape, it would be through him. Somehow, she would have to find a way to make him see her as something more than just a prisoner. She needed him to understand who she was and why the war had to end. The first step, she knew, was to survive. Then, and only then, would she be able to return to her people and reclaim what had been lost. And she would do it all without mercy, for her people, her honor, and her galaxy. Captain Derek Riker stood in the dimly lit control room, his hands clenched behind his back, staring out into the vastness of space. His thoughts were far from the reports he had been assigned to read or the daily operations he was supposed to oversee. His mind kept drifting back to the battlefield on Xerax, to the battle where he had faced the legendary Princess Alara of the Zura. He hadn't forgotten her face, nor the fire in her eyes when they had clashed. The way she had fought with such raw power and intensity, it was as though she were an unstoppable force. Even now, months after that battle, he could still hear the clash of their weapons, feel the heat of the explosions, and remember the moment when everything had changed. Riker had seen many battles, fought in countless wars, but nothing had shaken him like that day. He hadn't been prepared for the way the princess had looked at him, how, for a brief moment, their gazes had locked, and he saw something in her eyes that made him question everything. It wasn't hatred or anger, but something deeper, more complex. He couldn't quite place it, but it had lingered in his thoughts since that moment. The war had always been black and white to Riker. Humans against aliens. The strong survive, the weak fall. That's how it had always been. But now, after seeing Alara, after fighting beside her and seeing her in the moments between their clashes, he wasn't so sure anymore. It had been hard enough to accept the fact that she had been taken prisoner. Riker had been the one to bring her down, the one who had ordered her capture. The thought gnawed at him like a splinter buried deep in his mind. He had always followed orders without question, but something about this felt wrong. The Zura were a fierce race, yes, but they weren't the monsters humanity had been led to believe. They were warriors, much like humans, fighting for their own survival. And Alara, she was more than just a warrior. She was a leader. She had the heart of her people with her, and Riker had seen the way they had rallied around her. He had heard the stories of her victories and the way her people looked up to her. In a way, she had been like a god to them. A god who had fallen in battle, only to be captured and imprisoned by the very enemy she had fought so fiercely against. The guilt was overwhelming. Riker had been part of the mission to capture her, to break the Zura's spirit by taking away their symbol of strength. But now, as he stood here alone in the cold silence of the command room, he realized just how wrong that plan had been. He wasn't a fool. He knew why the higher-ups had wanted Alara alive. She was valuable. A trophy to be used to demoralize the enemy, to prove that humanity was stronger, more advanced. But Riker couldn't shake the feeling that they were wrong. The war wasn't about trophies or proving strength. It was about survival. He needed to fix this. He needed to make things right. For the next few days, Riker couldn't focus on anything. The reports piled up, but they remained unread. The meetings went on, but they felt distant, as though he were listening to someone else's life. He couldn't stop thinking about Alara. Couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at him. There was only one thing that would ease his mind: going to her, finding out the truth about why she had been captured and what the Zura were really fighting for. He had to understand. He had to see for himself what had driven her, what had made her fight so fiercely. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding. It was about redemption. And so Riker made a decision that would change everything. He gathered his most trusted team. They were a small group, but they were skilled. They were soldiers who had fought in the thickest of battles, who had survived when others fell. But more than that, they were people Riker knew he could rely on. They had all seen the horrors of war, and none of them were strangers to the cost of it. They gathered in a small briefing room, the atmosphere tense. Everyone knew what was at stake. The mission was dangerous, and it was not sanctioned by higher command. But Riker didn't care about that anymore. The mission to rescue Alara was personal, and he wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. "I'm going after her," Riker said, his voice firm but low. "The princess, we're going to find her and we're going to bring her back." The team nodded, some with hesitation, others with resolve. They all understood the risks, but they also understood the importance of the mission. This wasn't just about saving a prisoner. This was about understanding the enemy. This was about finding a way to end the war. "I know it's a big ask," Riker continued, looking each of them in the eye. "But I need all of you. We can't let the higher-ups control the narrative anymore. We're going to do this our way." And so the team set out, prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. They had no idea what they would find, or if they would even make it back. But they knew one thing for sure: they were going to do whatever it took to free Alara. As they traveled through the galaxy, the team encountered many obstacles. The human forces had not been idle. They had eyes everywhere, and they were watching for any sign of rebellion. Riker knew that every step they took could be their last. The closer they got to the Zura prison facility, the more tense the atmosphere became. But Riker couldn't back down. He had made his choice, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. He had to know the truth. He had to find Alara. He had to understand why the princess had been so fiercely committed to her people and what she truly stood for. Finally, after days of travel, they arrived at the facility. It was a massive, heavily fortified installation, hidden away in the farthest reaches of space. The place was cold, devoid of life, but it felt like the heart of the conflict. It was here that the answers to the war could be found. Riker stood in front of the massive gates, his heart racing. This was it, the moment that could change everything. He didn't know what he would find inside, but he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. "We're going in," he said quietly to his team as they prepared to infiltrate the facility. The door opened with a loud mechanical hiss, revealing the stark, sterile interior. Everything about it felt wrong. The walls were too smooth, too clean. There was no sign of life here, just the hum of machines and the occasional flicker of lights overhead. As they moved deeper into the facility, Riker couldn't help but think of Alara, her strength, her spirit, and the way she had looked at him during their battle. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: he wasn't just going after a prisoner. He was going after the truth. And once he found it, nothing would ever be the same. The closer Captain Riker and his team got to the facility, the more they could feel the weight of their mission bearing down on them. The tension in the air was palpable, every step they took closer to the Zura prison feeling heavier. The men and women who made up his small team of soldiers were seasoned warriors, but none of them had ever been on a mission like this before. It wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a journey into enemy territory, into the heart of the unknown, and it carried more risks than any of them had ever imagined. As the team landed their ship on a remote, barren planet not far from the facility, Riker gathered his team together in a dimly lit briefing room. The walls of the room seemed to close in on them, pressing down on their shoulders as they huddled together, the harsh silence between them making the task ahead feel even more daunting. "We don't know what we'll find inside," Riker began, his voice calm but serious. "But what we do know is that we're not turning back. We're getting Alara out. That's the mission, no matter what happens." His words hung in the air, and Riker could see the uncertainty in his team's eyes. They had all been through wars and battles, but this was different. It wasn't just about fighting enemies. It was about going behind enemy lines into a place where their own government would consider them traitors. They weren't just defying orders. They were defying everything they had been taught about the war. But Riker didn't care about any of that anymore. The longer he thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about Alara. It was about ending this senseless war. It was about showing the galaxy that there was another way, that both humans and the Zura could exist without slaughtering each other in the name of power. He had seen what the Zura were capable of. Alara had shown him that. And he knew that if the war continued, there would be no end. "Are we ready?" Riker asked, breaking the silence. He looked at each member of his team, his gaze steady. One by one they nodded, each of them understanding the stakes. No more words needed to be said. They were committed, and no matter what awaited them inside the facility, they would face it together. The team moved quickly and efficiently, using the cover of darkness and their advanced training to avoid detection. The facility, built into the heart of a mountain range, was a fortress, hidden from prying eyes. The walls were thick and fortified, and Riker knew that getting inside would be the hardest part. But they had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As they reached the outer perimeter, Riker held up a hand, signaling his team to stop. He surveyed the area carefully, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The moonlight barely touched the ground, casting long, eerie shadows across the rocky terrain. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We need to be in and out fast, stick to the plan, and don't deviate." The team nodded in agreement, their faces determined. Riker had a plan, and they had trained for this moment for weeks. They knew the risks, but they also knew that Alara's life and the future of the galaxy depended on their success. They moved quickly, sliding through the shadows like ghosts, making their way toward the entrance of the facility. Riker's heart raced with each step. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, but it wasn't just fear that drove him. It was a sense of urgency, of knowing that time was running out. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that the humans would realize something was wrong. When they reached the main entrance, Riker signaled for them to stop again. The massive doors loomed in front of them, an intimidating barrier between them and the unknown. Riker approached the door carefully, his fingers brushing against the cold metal surface. He checked his watch. There was no time to waste. He activated the device on his wrist, and within seconds the door clicked open with a low hiss. They were inside. The inside of the facility was just as cold and sterile as the outside. The walls were smooth, metallic, and barren, with no signs of life. It felt like they were walking through a tomb, each step echoing in the silence. Riker's instincts were on high alert as he moved through the halls, the team following closely behind him. They passed empty rooms, hallways, and doors locked tight. It was clear that the facility had been built for one purpose, to hold prisoners. And Riker's heart sank as he thought about Alara, locked away somewhere in this massive structure. But they couldn't stop now. They had to find her. They continued down the narrow hallway, the only sound the soft click of their boots against the metal floors. They finally reached a door that stood slightly ajar. Riker motioned for the team to stop. They had reached the section of the facility where Alara was being held. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. The time had come. He pushed the door open, and what they saw inside sent a chill down their spines. Alara was there, seated in a small, sterile cell. Her once pristine armor was gone, replaced with a simple jumpsuit that did little to hide the bruises and scars on her body. She looked thin, weaker than she had been on the battlefield, but her eyes, those fierce, determined eyes, were unchanged. Riker's heart clenched as he saw her. She was a warrior even in captivity. Alara's eyes flicked toward the door as they entered, and for a moment their gazes locked. There was no hate in her eyes, no anger, just a quiet understanding. She knew who they were. She had known they would come. "You're not dead," Riker said softly, his voice filled with relief. Alara didn't respond at first, but then she spoke, her voice hoarse but strong. "No, I'm not, but I should be. You should have let me die with honor on the battlefield." Riker shook his head. "We're not here to take you back to your cell, Alara. We're here to get you out of here. We're ending this war." For a long moment, Alara simply stared at him. Then she stood slowly, her movements stiff but deliberate. She didn't speak as she walked toward the door, but Riker could see the resolve in her eyes. She was ready, ready to fight, ready to end this war. As she stepped into the hallway, Riker could sense something change between them. It wasn't just about saving a prisoner anymore. It wasn't about a human and an alien locked in an endless struggle. It was about something bigger than that. It was about hope. Together, they moved through the facility, carefully avoiding the guards and finding their way back to the ship. The team was quiet, focused on their mission, but as Riker glanced over at Alara, he saw the smallest hint of a smile on her lips. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. And for Riker, that was enough. They had done the impossible. They had rescued her. Now they would do what they had come here for. They would change the future of the galaxy. The escape was only the beginning. As Riker and his team led Alara through the labyrinthine hallways of the facility, it was clear that they had only just started to unravel the weight of what they had come to do. Alara, despite her weakened state, moved with a quiet confidence that surprised Riker. She had been in captivity for months, but the fire within her hadn't faded, and it was clear now that she wasn't just a prisoner. She was a leader, and that strength was more than just physical. They had made it this far without being detected, but they were far from safe. Every step felt like it could be their last. The facility was silent now, eerily so. There was no sound of guards, no hum of machinery, just the oppressive silence of a place built to break those who were held inside it. Riker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somehow someone was aware of their presence, waiting for them to make a mistake. As they reached the outer corridor, Alara stopped, holding up her hand to signal for everyone to stop. Riker glanced at her, unsure of what had caused her to pause. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a knowing, a quiet urgency. "They know we're here," she said, her voice low but clear. Riker's heart skipped a beat. She was right. Despite their careful planning, despite their quiet steps, they had been compromised. He could feel the shift in the air, the way the tension seemed to rise in his chest. "Get ready," Riker muttered to his team, his voice hardening as he scanned the hallway ahead. They had no choice now. They couldn't go back. They had to fight their way out. Without another word, Riker motioned for the team to move forward. Alara, despite her weakened state, fell into step beside him. Her gaze was steady, her shoulders straight, as though she had never been imprisoned at all. Her confidence was something Riker couldn't ignore, something that gave him the strength he hadn't even known he needed. They were in this together now. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor ahead. Riker motioned for the team to duck into a nearby alcove, pressing his back against the cold metal walls. They held their breath, waiting for the guards to pass. But just as they thought they were safe, the sound of boots grew louder. They were getting closer. Riker's mind raced. There was no time for hesitation. He gave the signal. They would fight their way out, and they would do it together. The first guard turned the corner, his back to them. Riker wasted no time. He stepped out from the alcove, moving quickly, silently. With a swift motion, he knocked the guard unconscious, pulling him into the shadows. The rest of the team followed suit, moving quickly and quietly. But there was no time to celebrate. The sound of more footsteps reached their ears. The alarm was going to go off soon, and they needed to get to the hangar, where their ship was waiting for them. Alara was already moving ahead, her pace unbroken, her eyes scanning the hallway. Riker could see the way her muscles tensed, the way she was ready for whatever came next. He had seen it before, the way she commanded the battlefield, how she moved with precision and purpose. She was a warrior, and in that moment Riker realized just how much he had underestimated her. She wasn't just some captured princess. She was the heart of her people, and she had not given up, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. The corridor grew darker as they moved forward. Riker's eyes darted from side to side, scanning for any sign of danger. The air felt colder, and the walls seemed to close in on them. Time was running out. They had to reach the hangar before the facility went into full lockdown. As they rounded the final corner, they saw it, the entrance to the hangar. The door was just ahead, but it was guarded. 2 soldiers stood at attention, blocking the way. Riker's heart raced. This was it. They were almost there, but they couldn't just walk through the door. Riker turned to his team. "We're going to have to fight," he said, his voice low. They all nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This was the moment they had been working for, the moment that would determine whether or not they made it out alive. He moved forward, stepping out of the shadows and into the open. The soldiers turned toward him, their eyes wide with surprise. Riker didn't hesitate. With a quick motion, he drew his weapon and fired. The first soldier went down, and the second immediately opened fire. Riker ducked behind cover, returning fire with deadly precision. The sound of gunfire echoed through the hall, each shot a reminder of the stakes they were facing. The team moved in unison, covering each other, taking down the guards one by one. Alara, though weaker than she had been before, was right beside them. She moved with purpose, her movements sharp and focused as she fought alongside them. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was a fighter. The battle was quick but intense. In moments, the last guard fell, and the team moved toward the hangar door. Riker pressed the button to open it, and with a loud hiss, the doors slid open, revealing their ship waiting in the dim light of the hangar. They had made it, but the journey wasn't over yet. Riker knew that they weren't out of danger. The facility would be on high alert now. They had to move fast. "Let's go," Riker shouted as he and his team rushed toward the ship. Alara was already ahead of him, her footsteps echoing in the vast hangar as she moved with determination. Riker followed close behind, his heart racing. They had fought hard for this moment, and now they had to escape before they were trapped. As they boarded the ship, Riker glanced over at Alara. Her expression was calm, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been through so much, and yet she still stood strong. The door closed behind them with a hiss, sealing them in. Riker took the pilot's seat, his hands moving quickly over the controls. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the ground, breaking free from the confines of the facility. As they soared into the sky, Riker couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. They had made it out, but this was just the beginning. They still had to face what lay ahead, the fight to end the war, the fight to bring peace. But for now, they were free. They had each other, and that was enough. Alara sat quietly beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the window. Riker could feel the weight of her thoughts, but he didn't push her to speak. She would tell him when she was ready. For now, they were in this together. They had taken the first step toward a new future, one where the galaxy could finally know peace. And no matter what happened next, Riker knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Alara face it alone. The stars stretched out in every direction as Riker's ship sailed silently through the vast emptiness of space. It had been days since their escape, and the sense of urgency had not waned. The tension between the team members was still palpable, but there was something different now. They had achieved the impossible. They had rescued Alara, the fierce princess of the Zura, and they had made it out of the human-controlled facility without being caught. Now, however, the real challenge began. Their mission had only just begun. The galaxy was still at war, and the stakes were higher than ever. With Alara by his side, Riker knew they had to find a way to end the conflict, to bring peace to the galaxy. But how could they do that when the war seemed endless, with no clear path to a resolution? Alara had been quiet ever since they had left the facility, her eyes often distant, as though lost in thought. Riker could see the weight of what she had been through, the physical and emotional toll of being captured, tortured, and imprisoned. But there was something else too, something he had noticed the moment he had first spoken to her. A fire, a determination. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was a leader. She had been through more than anyone should have to endure, and yet she had never lost her strength. It was that strength that kept Riker focused. He had come to this point not just for her, but for all of the Zura. They were people like his own, driven by survival and a desire for peace, and he had seen the same in Alara. Her people were not the monsters humanity had been led to believe. They were warriors, yes, but they were also survivors, just like humans. Riker glanced over at her now, as she stood by the window, staring out at the stars. Her features were soft in the dim light, but there was a hardness in her eyes that betrayed the calm exterior. He could tell she was struggling with something. She hadn't spoken much about her past or her people's history, and Riker didn't press her to do so. He knew that it would take time for her to open up, but he had to admit that he was eager to understand more about her, about why she had fought so hard to keep her people safe. "How are you holding up?" Riker asked, his voice quiet. Alara didn't turn to face him, but her gaze flickered toward him for a moment. "I'm fine," she said softly, her tone guarded. "I've been through worse." Riker didn't push further. He could see the walls she had built around herself, the ones she had learned to put up after years of war. He understood. He had his own walls, ones he had built after years of following orders without questioning them. But now, as he looked at Alara, he couldn't help but wonder if the galaxy's problems could truly be solved through force alone. The war had brought so much pain, so much loss. The people of both the human and Zura worlds were tired, but neither side seemed willing to stop fighting. As Riker steered the ship toward a secluded planet, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move, he couldn't help but wonder if there was another way. Alara finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice steady. "There's a planet a few light years away," Riker said, tapping a few commands into the ship's control panel. "It's neutral territory. We can lay low there for a while, figure out what we're going to do next." Alara nodded, but Riker could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. She had the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders, and she wasn't one to rest while there was still a war to fight. She needed a purpose, a mission, something that would give her the strength to keep moving forward. "Do you think we can end this war?" Riker asked, his voice low. Alara met his gaze then, her eyes locking onto his with a fire he had come to recognize. She didn't answer right away, but Riker could see the intensity behind her silence. She was calculating, weighing the options, considering the risks. "We can," she finally said, her voice firm, "but it won't be easy. The war isn't just about who has the stronger army or the better weapons. It's about power, about control. And there are forces on both sides that will never want peace." Riker nodded. He knew she was right. There were always those who profited from war, politicians, generals, and leaders who saw the conflict as a means to gain power and influence. And as long as those people were in control, peace would always be out of reach. "But we can start," Alara continued, her voice growing stronger. "We can create a coalition, a movement of those who are tired of fighting. We can bring together the people who want peace and show them that it's possible. It will take time, but it's the only way." Riker felt a spark of hope at her words. He had always believed in the power of people, the idea that when the masses stood together, they could change the course of history. He had seen it before in small ways, in the way people had come together to fight for what was right. But this was different. This was a chance to stop the war, not just for the humans, but for the Zura and for everyone who had been caught in the crossfire. "You're right," Riker said, his voice steady. "We'll make it happen." And so they set a course for the planet, preparing themselves for the next phase of their mission. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Riker felt like they had a real chance to change things. The idea of bringing together humans and Zura for peace seemed impossible, but it was the only option. There was no other way forward. As the ship descended toward the surface of the neutral planet, Riker glanced at Alara one last time. She was standing by the window again, staring out at the planet below, her expression pensive. He knew that this journey would be long, and there would be many challenges ahead. But with Alara by his side, he knew they could face anything. The ship touched down softly on the surface of the planet, and Riker powered down the engines. As the door to the ship opened, a blast of cool air filled the cabin. The planet was desolate, its surface covered in dry, cracked earth, but it was a safe place. They could rest, regroup, and plan their next move. It was the calm before the storm, and Riker knew that the real battle was only just beginning. Alara stood beside him as they exited the ship, her eyes scanning the barren landscape. She was a warrior, a leader, and though she had been through more than anyone should have to endure, she stood tall. "We'll need to reach out to the others," she said, her voice steady. "We need allies, those who want peace. We can't do this alone." Riker nodded. He understood. The war would not end with just one victory. It would take the strength of many, the unity of both the humans and the Zura to bring peace to the galaxy. And so, they began their journey. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments of doubt, but Riker and Alara kept moving forward. The people of the galaxy needed them, and they couldn't stop now. Together, they would change the future. Together, they would bring peace to a war-torn galaxy.